My best friend in high school, Jill Harrison, introduced me to the Baha'i faith. Sometime in 10th grade or so, when I started to spend a lot of time with Jill and her family, she began to fill me in on her family's religion. As a devout Catholic at the time, who really only knew about Catholicism, there were no other forms of Christianity out there, and some Judaism, thanks to Jewish friends from gymnastics, and some Buddhism, since my mom liked to collect Buddhist statues. Hearing of this other religion was pretty eye-opening. I don't recall ever getting a lecture or anything from the Harrisons, but I do remember attending programs at the Baha'i Meeting House in Teaneck, New Jersey, and learning, in dribs and drabs, some of the core tenets. I also recall learning some of the restrictions about smoking, drinking, and sex, which bummed me out because, well, I was already a Catholic and that carried a lot of restrictions. But the one idea that really stuck with me and does to this day is the one planet, one people, please. Jillsy, as we called her, had a banner with this saying on it, and maybe even a t-shirt, and I do recall a bumper sticker. Whatever its format, I recall talking about this as well as education and Esperanto with the Harrisons over dinner. The concept was pretty radical to me, and as a result of my friendship with Jill, I learned about international policy, something that my high school didn't really teach, and the role of the United Nations, another thing that my high school didn't really teach. Inspired by my newfound knowledge and thanks to Jill's spiritual calling, in 1985, she and I founded the International Year of the Youth Club at Bergenfield High School to raise awareness of the United Nations and raise money for youth programs. While my Catholic upbringing and my parents had instilled in me a zeal for advocacy and justice, my activism was deeply informed and transformed by the things I learned from my Baha'i friends, the Harrisons. I do like to say that I was a Baha'i for a little while, and I was, and in some ways still carry parts of the Baha'i faith in my theology and worldview. I'm not sure who here knows much about the Baha'i faith, but I wanted to spend some time today talking about the wisdom of this relatively new religion, what it can teach us, but especially because I see some pretty clear parallels between Unitarian Universalism and the Baha'i faith. The Baha'i faith has its roots in Shiite Islam. Mirza Ali Muhammad of Shiraz, who became known as the Bab, which translates from Persian as gateway, is the herald of the Baha'i faith. And to go off book for a second, I remember Jill telling me a story that the Bab was imprisoned regularly. I'll get to that. But one time when he was imprisoned, he disappeared from the cell. And I haven't been able to find, and I haven't spoken to Jill in a couple of years, so I need her a phone call to find out if that's like one of those great mythology stories about how the Bab transcended the human plane, or just one of those cool theology stories we tell each other when we're teenagers or something. Anyway, the Bab was called the Gateway because he saw himself as the bearer of a message to transform humanity's spiritual life. He told of the imminent appearance of a new messenger of God who would overturn old beliefs and customs and usher in a new era. The new messenger of God would turn out to be Mirza Hossein Ali Nouri, a follower of the Bab, who eventually took the name of Baha'u'llah, which means, in Persian, glory of God. The Bab's teaching spread quickly throughout Iran, what's now modern-day Iran, provoking opposition from both the Shiite Muslim clergy and the government. The Bab was arrested, and after several years of incarceration, was executed by a firing squad in 1850. He was not the only believer to be killed. Approximately 20,000 people in that time period lost their lives during the result of persecution. And it continues to this day. But okay. Much like his predecessor, the Baha'u'llah was also persecuted and arrested. In 1852, he was jailed in Tehran, and during his imprisonment, he had his epiphanic moment and finally realized that he was the prophet whose coming had been predicted by the Bab. Upon his release in 1853, he was exiled to Baghdad And under his leadership, he revived the teaching of the Bab and added his own. He began to receive the revelations I talked of earlier. His teachings kept him in a state of exile, moving from Baghdad to Constantinople, then Adrianople, and then finally exiled to Palestine. Since the Baha'is' faith birth, it has faced resistance and persecution. Many Baha'is, including the Bab, have become martyrs or were imprisoned by the Iranian government. As is often the case, the persecution has arisen from a combination of religious and social factors. One major social factor leading to persecution of Baha'is is their emphasis on education. Because they believe so strongly in education, they are highly educated, they wind up landing prominent roles in society and occupations of power. Clearly, having a high educational status and positions in society, coupled with this expansive and inclusive worldview, which we're going to get to, makes them a perceived threat. So what is so threatening? What do Baha'is believe, and where does this one planet, one people idea come from? The Baha'i faith is monotheistic, believing in one all-powerful creator God. However, unlike other monotheistic faiths, Baha'is emphasize that God is ultimately unknowable in essence. But human knowledge or understanding of God can be had through messengers or manifestations. Baha'i doctrine emphasizes the unity of humanity despite differences in race or socioeconomic status. It emphasizes the unity of world's religions and the progressive revelation of God to humanity, that we will always be taught something more. I love these ideas. Humankind as one, religion as a unifier instead of a divider, and the notion that God, however you conceive of it, will continue to reveal its divinity to us. So I found this passage on the official Baha'i website and found the similarities to Unitarian Universalism stunning. So I want you, as you listen, see if you can match it to our principles. Right. Among these principles are the independent search after truth, the oneness of the entire human race, which is the pivotal principle of the Baha'i faith, the abolition of all forms of prejudice, the harmony which must exist between religion and science, the equality of men and women, the two wings on which the bird of humankind is able to soar, the introduction of compulsory education, the adoption of a universal auxiliary language, Esperanto, the abolition of the extremes of wealth and poverty, the institution of a world tribunal for the adjudication of disputes between nations, and the confirmation of justice as the ruling principle in human affairs. Right? Pretty close, right? I heard all. They weren't explicit about the interconnected web, but that's in there when I started to go down a rabbit hole and I pulled myself back about nature. But it's in there, but not. I do think that I would like to have seen the all life instead of humans being, but we'll get there. I did do some digging on that, that's right. And here's this quote about nature. Seeing the reflection of God's attributes in nature and understanding them as an expression of His will inspires in us a deep respect for the natural world. That sums it up, right? So UUs and Baha'is are kindred spirits. I think we can also agree, while we don't explicitly talk about education for all, if you think about the time and place of the formation of the Baha'i faith, the importance of education makes a lot of sense. And I think all of us kind of agree with that concept. I love the idea of a universal language, and I had never heard of this, and I recall the Harrisons telling me about Esperanto, and Jill even loaning me a guide she had about learning Esperanto. And there's this fabulous jazz pianist that I've been introduced to recently, whose first album, the album title was, I'm forgetting it now, but she made it in Esperanto. And she's an American who lives and teaches in Kuwait. And so she's trying to, through jazz, spread Esperanto, which I think is kind of cool. So, I was going to write my own comparison between the Baha'i faith and Unitarian Universalism, but as I was researching, I found an article where a Baha'i wrote his own comparison to, of all things, Unitarian Universalism. I thought that was kind of neat. Like, the internet's filled with all kind of interesting stuff. So I'm going to use his analysis, and I'm going to point out a difference that I made. Once again, the author of the UU part of the text, the language is very inclusive, right? There's no man or mankind. But in the Baha'i quotes, use man. I've changed some of them to human, but I encourage you, if I missed any, whenever you hear that, as you use, let's just make that an inclusive language there. So this Baha'i, Dave Langness, writes the following. Both Unitarians and Baha'is believe in an independent search for truth. And he quotes Unitarian writer David Rankin, who says, as Unitarians, we believe in the never-ending search for truth. If the mind and heart are truly free and open, the revelations that appear to the human spirit are infinitely numerous, eternally fruitful, and wondrously exciting. And then Abdul Baha, who came after the Baha'u'llah, wrote, no man should follow blindly his ancestors and forefathers. Nay, each must see with his own eyes, hear with his own ears, and investigate independently in order that he may find the truth. The religion of forefathers and ancestors is based upon blind imitation. Man should investigate reality. Right? Pretty cool. Both Unitarians and Baha'is believe in the freedom of expression. Rankin again says, we believe in the freedom of religious expression. All individuals should be encouraged to present openly their religious opinions without fear of censure or reprisal. And then Shoghi Effendi, who was one of the leaders of the Baha'i faith and died in the 60s, I think. Let us also remember that at the very root of the cause lies the principle of the undoubted right of the individual to self-expression, his freedom to declare his conscience and set forth his views. Both Unitarians and Baha'is believe in love. UUs say, we believe in the motive force of love. The governing principle in human relationships is the principle of love, which always seeks the welfare of others and never seeks to hurt or destroy. And Abdul Baha says, reality is love, ever working for the welfare of humanity. Reality is the bond which conjoins the heart. This ever uplifts man toward higher stages of progress and attainment. And finally, both Unitarians and Baha'is believe in the essential goodness and harmony of all faiths. UUs say, we believe in the toleration of religious ideas. All religions in every age and culture possess not only intrinsic merit, but also potential value for those who have learned the art of listening. Well, that's a good lesson, Miss Lincoln. And Abdul Baha wrote, from the days of Adam until today, the religions of God have been made manifest, one following the other, and each one of them fulfilled its due function, revived humankind, and provided education and enlightenment. The religion of God is one religion, but it must be ever renewed. I do want to point out one major shortcoming, though, of the Baha'i faith for me, especially even before I was a UU, but especially now. The Baha'i religion as it stands is not inclusive of our LGBTQ siblings. Love, sex, and marriage are dictated along heterosexual lines, and to me, this seems counter to so many of the ideals they espouse. Granted, we can easily point to both the time period and location of the development of the Baha'i faith, when and where the Bab and Baha'u'llah lived, to see these roots of exclusion. However, as a UU, I find it really hard to understand how a religion so deeply based on love and against prejudice and world community can exclude people I love. And actually, I feel the same way about any religion who preaches that kind of exclusion. And I did some research, and there is a movement bubbling up, certainly among American Baha'is, there's a person seeking funding now to create a documentary about his experience of being a homosexual male in the Baha'i faith and how he was basically kicked out once he got married to the man he loved, right? And so he's really trying to move Baha'i into a more inclusive age, so I'm going to pay attention to that and see where that goes. Right? I do value what they offer the world, and I hope that we'll see some evolution in that area. So to close, I decided to focus on the Baha'is' teachings of generosity, since we are entering our pledge month, and rather than doing an entire sermon about pledging, I thought we could just take a learning from a fellow faith. When the Baha'u'llah wrote about generosity, he did so in an all-encompassing way. For example, he says, "Just as a candle's purpose is to provide light, the human soul was created to give generously. We fulfill our highest purpose in life of service, in which we offer our time, energy, knowledge, and financial resources. The impulse to give springs forth from the love of God," or insert your deity or non-deity of choice. "As this love fills our hearts, generosity comes to characterize the pattern of our conduct. When we serve others for the love of God, we are neither motivated by the hope of recognition and reward, nor by the fear of punishment. A life of service to humanity implies humility and detachment, not self-interest and ostentation." I like that the calling to be generous comes from a calling to serve others out of love. I also like that humility is part of the equation. We don't give and act to be seen giving and acting. We do it because we are humbly called to do so. Another quote from the Baha'u'llah certainly reminds me of our UU call of service, to live with love and to make the world more just and equitable. He says, "Be generous in prosperity and thankful in adversity. Be worthy of the trust of thy neighbor and look upon them with a bright and friendly face. Be a treasure to the poor, an admonisher to the rich, an answerer to the cry of the needy, a preserver of the sanctity of thy pledge. Be fair in thy judgment and guarded in thy speech. Be unjust to no person and show all meekness to all humans. Be as a lamp unto them that walk in darkness, a joy to the sorrowful, a sea for the thirsty, a haven for the distressed, an upholder and defender of the victim of oppression. Let integrity and uprightness distinguish all thine acts. Be a home for the stranger, a balm to the suffering, a tower of strength for the fugitive. Be eyes to the blind and a guiding light unto the feet of the erring. Be an ornament to the countenance of truth, a crown to the brow of fidelity, a pillar of the temple of righteousness, a breath of life to the body of humankind, an ensign of the hosts of justice, a luminary above the horizon of virtue, a dew to the soil of the human heart, an ark on the ocean of knowledge, a sun in the heaven of bounty, a gem on the diadem of wisdom, a shining light in the firmament of thy generation, a fruit upon the tree of humility." May it be so.